And I'm going to be today talking about data models and what's going on in standardization. Okay? So I'm going to start with a warning side that, not everything I'm going to say is it's a fact. So this is, very opinionated, if you want, area. There's a lot of things which are still on development. And so I want to make sure that you know about that. But definitely there is a lot of a lot of questions I may answer you, depends, or what's your opinion, so don't get mad at me. And of course, in that regards, I really want to take this opportunity to get your feedback. I think John is here, I'm here, there's other people from the BU, but it's really that I think we're in a good moment to get more feedback on what you think we should be doing, correct, regarding, or should we be doing more than just, giving you the platform to you do whatever you want, correct? So that's extremely important, and please don't hesitate to, to reach out to us during these days. So what's the agenda? We're going to try to talk a little bit about these standard data models, and I got the application, but we got so little. So I guess most of you have heard about that. So we're going to try to talk a little bit about what it is, why it's happening now, where and when it's going to happen. That's the first question we get typically. We're going to talk a little bit about IETF models or MEF models as example, things that we have done. And probably you may or may not have been involved already, or there may be some conversations going on in your company about those. We're going to do a little bit, then talk a little bit about the way forward we see. Make sense? Okay, let's dive into it. So what are standard service models? So basically this, there's an effort from different standardization models, bodies to define, a common understanding on how should we modelize well-known service. So I'm in pre-sales. Number one question I get to the customer says, I cannot be the first one doing L3VPN. Give me the L3VPN you already have. And then I come back and say, yeah, I got the demo, but it's not going to work for you because you got different devices, you different things. So there is this effort saying, well, actually we do have some knowledge on what kind of services we want to do. Can we basically modelize that? So the first question that comes into the standardization process is, okay, can we define even which are our demarcation points? And that's the first controversial area. APIs to what? We got an API, you got something southbound, something northbound, correct? So there's a document, that's an RFC in the ETF that actually Carl Mober and Benoit Claes was a co-author. And actually, it basically says typically what we're going to see, and this is, you can map it to NSO, is something like, standard models for devices. So network elements, what we call in NSO devices. It could be a single element, could be actually an NMS, could be a controller, could be another application. And then we have something on the top with we're going to call network service, correct? And we don't know what that is, but it's an abstraction, correct? Could be an L3VPN, could be an L2, could be a virtualization, correct? Could be a port channel, whatever, automation, or could be a BGP, a full mesh automation, whatever that is. So that's the classification I'm going to use today. But, I just want to raise that there's people saying, oh, no, we need to put 20 more demarcation points there and standardize way more APIs. So that's an area where, to be honest, my personal opinion is I think, we are extremely far away. If we make to even agree on 2, that's a huge step forward for this, for this community or this industry, and then do 20 or, hierarchical controllers or whatever we want to do. Now, one of the points I want to say is that I'm going to be focusing, because we are in NSO Development Days, I'm going to focus mainly on standardization from the point of view of, configuration and state, but I'm not going to focus on telemetry. So there, besides the standard models for L2, L3VPN, there's a lot of effort also in terms of what's called model-driven telemetry, which luckily they're also using Yang, as an example, but that's more, let's say, more of a greenfield environment. So when we discuss when and these sort of things, that goes much faster maybe than what we see for services. Okay? So just to make sure, because that's a little bit of out of scope. Did anybody know what telemetry is? Nobody doesn't know what telemetry is? No, everybody knows? Okay. Good. So why? Why do we need standard models? So one of the points that's interesting is from a device perspective, more and more we are seeing adoption, luckily, of YANG-based APIs, correct? We got netconf, we got now RESTconf, and we have something called GNMI or gRPC. I think this morning we had that discussion, and that was very good, because whatever the encoding is, what we are doing is self-render the YANG models to basically build some. We have let's say we have the chance to self-render that model and create some sort of off-the-shelf adapters, correct? Today, if we look at NSO southbound, and I think this is the comment was given in the morning, was that, you by yourself, you can create netconf southbound adapters, but any of the other tools will require a NED. So you need to develop a NED. While in the netconf case, we can actually go and build it, we can create a generic, if you want, adapter from the YANG models. I know it's not exactly that, but let's put it that way. What's interesting is that once we agree, let's say we have a new technology, and we agree we need an API for CRUD operation, create, read, update, and delete, and we decided to use one of those, particularly netconf. Okay, let's say we agree that we're going to use netconf. Now, defining the YANG model becomes equal to defining, let's say, the API, because the encoding, are we going to use SSH or TLS? Are we going to use, what kind of encryption are we going to use? Are we going to use, what is going to be the RPC to do a modification or a read, etc.? Are we going to have filtering? All of that, internal plumbing of the API, it's already decided in the very generic document and define those APIs. So the only difference between a standard API for SD1 than from a standard API for L3VPN is basically the YANG model. So defining the YANG model becomes like defining the API itself without the effort of having to define all the plumbing. And that's a huge plus of using the standardization, because imagine there's a problem with a crypto algorithm. You need to keep updating your document on all of that plumbing while the IETF is doing for you. And I'll tell you, I'll work there, and they are very serious security guys there, correct? So I'm sure they can do a much better job than Etsy or some of those guys, because they are 100% doing that. So that's an important point. The other point is that, if we do this, we know, we got to promise that we're going to have cost savings, correct? So both from the, if we are in NSO and you got standard models to talk to the devices, a BGP config, even from your service design, a template for Juniper, for Cisco will look the same, correct? And if you are northbound of the system, you can think that the northbound system can also create technology a little bit out of the shelf, correct? So there's a promise of some cost savings, so that's why it's a little bit conditioning. We can discuss where we are in the industry and if that really is going to happen. But definitely, at least on the southbound side, I think we have a good chance on some part of the technology to get those savings. Now, one of the important points I want to transmit, I think, let's say we can agree on this, and this is, again, could be something to raise your hand, but I think standardization is good for this community for a number of reasons. Some are more tangible than others. First, increase the awareness of what you guys are doing. So what your guys are doing is spreading. So you don't need to convince the people anymore of why YANG, why you choose, a YANG-based platform, etc. The other point is that it's bringing more and more interop and testing and, onboarding of devices talking in netconf. I was impressed by the work NTT did on optical, 15 vendors. we've seen 6 in the interop test on EANTC. So it's amazing what even you guys can drive in terms of getting those vendors to implement those standards, because that's where the industry is going, correct? And again, that means less nets, more, more cost to the device vendor and less on you, correct? Now, of course, more use of netconf means more interop test. That means also, the things I don't know if you were in the common data model, but that's an example of things that, hey, we need to improve NSO because there's more people using the standard, so we need to, maybe our understanding was not exactly right, and we need to improve NSO. So all of that helps. All of that helps our community, help us make the product better. It makes your code more robust, more tested, etc. And of course, we think we can go and, for example, do simpler business logic, the templates, I'll say, no longer taking care of different devices, or, trying to say, hey, there's a standard L3VPN service, so the idea of a single transaction, network-wide transaction, which is natural for everybody here. If you go to the OSS vendor, it's completely new. The idea that you can do a commit and you come back with an okay, no okay, and they don't need to go configure the interface, configure the VRF, configure this. That's new. So this sort of knowledge is going up, and that's very important, correct? Now, the backside is that more people in your organization will be aware of this. It's going to be touching more people. So you're going to need to spend more time educating on, on what's the bridge between the goals, what's possible, how to get there, etc. Okay? Make sense? Okay. Do we all agree it's good? Somebody's afraid? Yeah. I'm a little bit afraid, but now, where? Well, that's where I am a little bit afraid. It's happening everywhere. And is it organized? Is it, coordinated? No. The answer is no. So that means you need to be educated because you need to make choices. Okay? It's happening in very different places. So if you go to the, let's say, network element side, you got organizations like IETF, you got organizations like, IEEE, which are natural places with well-established process. And then you have places like OpenConfig, and we heard some comments this morning about what Google is doing there and the influence Google has. So that's an area where we say, okay, what's the process there? How can we get changes there? So it's a little bit of, of a mix here where, we also have overlaps. So sometimes the same config happens in 2 different data models. So vendor A may be implementing data model from organization A, vendor B from organization B, or maybe vendor A is implementing both. So if I do a sync from, I see 2 times the same configuration object represented with 2 different YAML models, correct? So definitely also an area where common data model may help us, correct? And all that work that we're doing to help us managing this dilemma, okay? So that's why we're working there. If we go to the service side, that's another area where there's some overlaps, correct? We got MEF, for example, working with the traditional area they've been working on, which is carrier Ethernet services. And I'll tell you, they did a very good job. They're doing a very good job. Then we got IETF saying, hey, I also want to do it. And you look at the 2 data models, and they are 98% equal, correct? So we need to choose. If you look at ONF, it's kind of like they jump into some areas where you would not traditionally put ONF. They were supposed to be doing, open flow, but they've done things like standardizing microwave services, or or transport API services, the TAPI API. So very interesting, but also requires a lot of education, time, and basically shopping around, correct? But as I said, no entities are equal, and they don't have the same process, they don't have the same membership. Sometimes we are not welcome to tell them you made a mistake in this young model. So if you choose, if you shop around, participation is very important. So why? Also because if you are here, it's because you choose NSO. And what we have seen in in the field with some of these organizations that don't have, let's say, the strict process that ETF has, where Young will review every single Young model, is that the tool, because everybody's going to use tooling for checking, correct, integrity, etc. But the tooling they're using are not as strict as NSO, okay? Particularly, they don't look at models, Young models, in a specific context. They look at Young models just for syntaxes. So that provides a problem because they may be putting a standard into, releasing it as a standard and may not work for you in NSO because they made a mistake, is not 100% compatible with actually the Young specification. So based on experience, the typical things we see, the first thing, the most typical stuff we see now is the XPack expression problems. So they put in the Young model a mass expression that points to a non-existing leaf. And their compiler doesn't even check the must, but we do check the must, correct? So that's an issue because when you go to NSO, NSO will not accept that Young model, but maybe they didn't care because their tool doesn't do that, but we do care. Over the years, we've seen more, let's say, more hardcore stuff. We've seen people even flagrantly violating Young, basically putting a statement which is Young 1.1, but on the top of the model having Young 1.0. How can it compile? We don't know. But this is the kind of things, what's nice about it is, and I have it in the previous slide, is that, we have this youngcatalog.org repository that Benoit is having, and he's constantly compiling these models and trying to flag alerts and convincing people to improve those Young models. So there's a lot of, let's say, checks that needs to happen. And what's nice about NSO is that you can do it yourself. So you can always create a netconf-based Young package or a netconf net or a package with your Young model just to make sure that the one you choose, compiles with NSO and it's 100% correct. Okay? So we are working in the background. We're trying to make this happen. We're influencing these organizations to be 100% compatible with the standard. But it's a process, like what we're saying. So one of the other point is that, when we look at the, let's say I have 100% a Young model that it's 100% good, it compiles perfectly from an NSO perspective, And let's take the TAPI API use case, So in the TAPI API, which is the transport API done by the ONF, which means is the API, the network service API that you're exposed to configure transport, like optical. Okay, so I have optical devices, I need to expose an optical service. So what's interesting here is that in the specification, they mention if you want to program an optical controller, you're going to have two ways to do it. You can do native netconf or restconf primitives, the way you do a CRUD operation, a create, a read, an update, a delete. Or you're going to have to run these RPCs, which are basically scripts. Okay? So from an NSO perspective, both methods are not equal. And the vendor will choose which of the two will do. So in both cases, you will be able to compile this and put it in NSO. But they're not the same. If you want an NSO on top of, for example, or you want to create this via service in NSO, it's not the same. If you want to create a service for an RPC, you will need to create an RPC in NSO, which is not the same as a service, correct? If you want to control this southbound in NSO, an RPC is not the same as an actual native CRUD, correct? So what I want to say is that, even if you got native Young models, this is an important aspect in terms of how that works with NSO, and we've seen this in the field, and the reality is that if you have these RPCs, maybe we do still need a net or something to connect to the device and recreate, and being able to create a template to deal with these RPCs. Okay? Is that clear for everybody? Yeah? So you're not doing set configuration, you're not doing get configuration, which are native ways to do it. We don't do it batch, push, on rest. You have like script-based, correct? It's just that you have an API. So that's an issue for us. The other point is that we're talking a lot about standard data models, but there's something else that is information models, correct? So many times when you specify how you want to program, let's take TAPI again, an optical controller, correct? It's not just, the API are going to send you. There's also an information model that you need to follow. So remember we talked, you do the interface first, you do the interface first, you do the BRF after, etc. Typically, from an NSO perspective, we want to do this in a single commit, the never while transaction. We like that a lot, but that's not always possible, okay? So setting that expectation is that sometimes you need to recreate those information models. And there's good information models and there's not that good information model for us. But one of the points is that there's sometimes that there's no workaround. And I'm going back to optical, programming an optical network through a controller, takes a lot of time. So there is, yes, you cannot do that in a single commit, correct? You do have an information model that you need to follow. And the good thing is that NSO has technology to do that, okay? So setting the expectation, information model exists, may require some sort of reactive fastmap. Everybody familiar with reactive fastmap here? So you may need more than one commit to make it happen, all right? So we need young models, but we need we need standard, by the standard, and also, hopefully we also choose the right information model. Now, when is this going to happen? When I'm going to be starting using them? Now, from a device perspective, the number of young models that are coming is huge, correct? It's the last XR has like 969 young models. But of course, when it's, we're talking 641, it was released, I think, 2 months ago. So when are you able to put 641 in every single device in your network or in your network at all, correct? So the nice thing is that, you see that progress. There is this catch up in the device side of feature parity from what comes in NetConf compared with what's available in other APIs like CLI. But they're making huge progress. And we see that not just in Cisco, we see that in the industry as a whole. Of course, you have the power to push the vendors to do that. When it comes to the services, that's much simpler because that's in your hands, And the only thing you need is a service that actually compiles, correct? And that was tricky at the beginning, but now actually the standardization bodies got better. And if you look at L2, L3VPN, or MEF Legato, these are stuff we have already tested. So yes, they are ready. They are ready. It just requires acceptance between whoever wants to run those standards, correct? It requires that the different people agree on that. Now, Young runs something called the EANTC Interop, and I think that's very important because those interop tests is, they're run by an organization which is manufacturer neutral. It basically is an annual 2 or 3 weeks? 2 weeks, basically lab setup with NDA, so it's not about pointing fingers, but really testing where we are. And it's creating very, very nice because they don't just test the plumbing of NetConf, can I connect? Do we do do we exchange the SSH stuff correctly? But also they're starting to test actual configuration and actual services implementation with even controllers talking to another controller, etc. So we've seen L2, L3VPN, IETF testing done, and it was showcased in Paris. So that helps you understand when we are. Yes, it can be implemented in NSO today. Okay, it's up to you to say, does it bring value to you? Correct. What's the business rationale to make it happen? Do your Northbound system have some sort of cost saving if you use standard models? Correct. Now, so the IETF L3VPN, I think it was an interesting place, an interesting example because that standard was created and launched, but it was launched without the a full, let's say, check review, And if you take the first standard and you put in NSO the day it was published, you realize that it was full of problems, correct? The same problems we said, paths were wrong, pointers to things that didn't exist, etc. But the good news is that helped improving the process. And now there's a team, but it already exists at the time, but there's a team called the Young Doctors, and actually they realize it's mandatory to get their okay before they publish. So that's why, we see more and more that, they're using the Young Doctors to make sure that, all of this doesn't happen. And Young is one of them, and I know you use NSO to check them. So before the IETF publish models, he's checking in NSO done their work, correct? So the good news is that they fixed that in 82.99, and that's ready to use, and actually was used in the EANTC. Now, it's ready to use. How? So let's look how. The first thing is, when I get a lot of RFPs. I'm blessed to have to answer RFPs. And in RFPs, I see people telling you, you must support RFC 8299 northbound. That for NSO, it's simple. I just put the YAML model there, make, package reload, done. So it's not the same as you need to support this standard that you need to have, a self-render platform for any young model. But the question is, what do you do with that intent that arrives northbound? Can you do anything with it out of the box? And the reality is that you cannot do anything. There's not enough information. Just that model doesn't give you enough information to instantiate the service. If we go to the discussion we had this morning, it's a very CFS level information, but you need to augment it with specific information about your network, particularly the topology of your network. So those standard models, the L2, the L3VPNs, will not tell you which is the PE you need to configure. It will not tell you which interface the customer is connected to. We don't even tell you which is the CPE that you need to configure many times. Some of them do, some of them don't. It just tells you, here's a UNI. It's called blah, and it's 1 gigabyte. So you are supposed to go to the inventory, get the data. So there is more work to do, correct? And that inventory information, it's your information. It's not from somebody else. Your implementation, you may have, you may have a pre-aggregation layer that somebody doesn't have. You may have, in your implementation, you may have switches, maybe a network. Maybe your ring is, maybe you want also to provision the optical to give that access. So all that information is not there. So those services really an intent from let's say a CFO, a client, or a customer intent. But you need to augment that with SP-specific information on your topology. The simpler things, you need to tell which PE and which interface. Of course, you're going to need also to augment in NSO with things like, the service data points and these sort of things that we need for NSO to know that that's a service that you want to implement, okay? So just to make sure, you need to do this. To be honest, in the test we do, that's not hard for us. That's 20 lines of YANG to add a topology information. But of course, when you go in your implementation of your network, you are like, oh, if it is wireless access, here's the topology. If it is this line, if it is ADSL, etc. So to get to the PE, it may not be that simple in a real scenario, correct? Now, the other point is that when you go into a standardization service model, what do you get? Well, you're going to get 178 lifts that needs to be configured or could be configured, but only 14 of them are mandatory. So what that tells you, how many options you have of service? A lot, correct? So there's a lot of options. Basically, because that's basically the union of all the feedback, of all the implementation, because remember, this organization, supposedly, most of them are based on consensus. So you need to keep everybody happy. So you're going to put everything there, correct? But from that everything, you, as an organization, you have business relationship. So you don't implement everything. You implement the service, you have contracts, correct? You have you're going to make money about. So you're not going to implement the cloud CPE connection if you don't sell that service. So you may have too many options in that there. And of course, the second problem on standard services, the second point of standard service regarding options is that of course, there may be too little options. So you have one flavor that actually didn't make it. Are you going to wait for the next implementation of the standard if that's your only Node-bound API to your systems, correct? So I don't want to give you, I just want to give you some hits, but in some of the implementation we've done, we look at the use of stacked services. So NSO has technology to say, yeah.
When you mention stacked services, do you mean the same as LSA? Layered? No, that's a different thing. Because I've heard both today, and I'm kind of confused which is which, or what is what.
Okay, I can answer. So stacked service is basically when you have one service referring to a lower level service. And LSA is the case when you have a stacked service and the lower level one is in a different node. But the stacked service could be on the same or another node. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, and we have even the idea, we have this term called LSA ready. So you can have like in one single node. So then you can move if you get that. So I have 5 more minutes, is that? Okay. So in order to introduce this idea of stacked services, how can it help us here? Let's look at the other example we did, which is the MEF example. So MEF is an organization that is interesting. They're moving into more, they started with carrier Ethernet, but they are getting some steam, and they want to do now L3VPN definitions. They want to do a lot of stuff. What's nice is that they model a lot of business relationships. So it's very common, particularly between carriers and international carriers. So it's a way for a carrier to consume services from another carrier. And as much of enterprise are becoming carriers themselves, it may be a good APIs for you to sell to your customers, correct? So I will encourage you to look at it, and they have a new program. They're going to be starting to, they're going to start to standardize a lot of stuff. They have certification. They have a lot of stuff, correct? So let me show you what we did with Telefonica that we published in the Layer 123 conference. So this is let's say, what MEF look as a reference architecture. They introduce another, basically NSO can take quite a lot of functionalities here. But the important thing is that they have this Legato API, which is basically let's say the API between your CFO, your customer-facing service, and the OSS or the business logic. Now, they have also some more infrastructure APIs. They call it Presto. It could be, this is maybe CLI or NetConf. It's not always clear. Here, if you got a controller for the optical side, that's what it will become, the TAPI, So there's many Presto. It's not going to be a single API. So from a Legato perspective, what they did and what we tested is L3VPN, okay? And that's what we took into the lab. And what we did is exactly this idea of, stacked services. So yes, we do have a Node-bound API which is standard compliant. Why? Because we want to take care of all of these savings. Maybe there is customers using that. Maybe there is an OSS system that use that out of the shelf. So I want to make sure that they do that. But that's not the one actually touching, that has most of my business logic. My business logic is in a lower service, correct? When I'm able to basically have the flexibility I want. So the only thing I need is basically to move and do a mapping between the Node-bound Legato API and my own service. And this service may be long-living, maybe already exists in your network, correct? Because you already implemented NSO there, okay? So in our case, we also connected to the topology inventory. We actually use IETF standards for describing the topology. And you see that if you have let's say you have an argument that is not even existing in the Legato standard, you can always do, non-standard stuff directly to your core. So you can do these sort of things with NSO. If we had like one-to-one mapping, we can even do other things, like features like transformations, which is interesting, but typically, we cannot count that that's going to happen. So what's interesting then is that, of course, from that standard NSO, I can move to I can use the nets, but I then can also map to the standard device IETF API. Okay? So the other point that is interesting with standards is that what we are going to gain is not just, as I said, the cost-saving piece is not just on the everybody using the same standards, is that it comes with the protocols themselves. more YAG means more netconf or restconf, and it means that we can do more things, let's say, self-render, correct? So there's a lot of work in the lower part, correct? So we are working, for example, towards 4.8 to bring something like called, call home, zero-touch provisioning, multi-vendor, etc. We are announcing actually, we're going to have in 4.7 next week that from those standard models or from any young models, we can create Swagger documentation. So that also helps improving those costs. Okay, so this is something we test. This also is related to all the buzz that's going on in the industry regarding zero-touch provisioning. Correct, standardization, standard bodies, standard, standard ways to do this sort of things. The last slide is about another test that we did in MEF. This was with another set of companies. We tested last year, and here is the point we tested. For you guys, it's very simple because it's obvious in NSO. But to understand where the industry is, this is extremely innovative. The idea that we got a Git repository, where we have a MEF Git repository that I can download the latest version of the MEF API. I can augment that with local repository with my annotations, my augments, etc., and then put that into a test bed or a production right away in a single pipeline, a single CI/CD pipeline. We demo that in MEF. That's something we take it naturally maybe here because we saw this morning how everybody's doing CI/CD, but definitely something that is very important for the industry and we're driving here. Okay, so just a summary. So standard YAML data models are important for this community because it's going to make all our work more relevant to more people, correct? So we are increasing, let's say, the audience of what's interesting on this. But, there is a lot of options, so you're going to need to shop around. So there's a lot of work for you also. And in that shop around, when you decide, you need to get involved. So, these are areas where implementers, developers, service providers, or whatever you are, opinion is extremely important, correct? And I would say that an NSO developer will have a very well-educated opinion in those forums, okay? And but when we go and say, okay, I have decided to use them because of X, Y, Z, because I think there is real business value for me to use them, just make sure that you check NSO gives you great tools to basically do that in a way that makes sense, that you don't tie yourself into a machine that you don't control. So we got stacked service, transformations, common data model, reactive fast map, etc. Okay? So I think this is an area where we can continue the discussion. I think even from the device perspective, we're having a lot of experience. It's kind of hard for us to opinion about other devices API, but also from a service perspective, that's very important. And I wanted to have that discussion in Developer Hub. I have some questions on the tool. I don't know if it makes sense. We have 5 minutes on the. Okay, Frederick was supposed to be here. He's not. Okay.
You can ask him out loud instead.
Okay. So now my main question is, I got 2 questions. Are you thinking about, deploying any of these standard, particularly service models? And the second question I have is, do you think Cisco should do something in terms of, building some sort of, function pack for these service models, or you rather just have examples in the GitHub and leave you alone to do your own path? I think that's the question that comes over and over to us, and we still don't, it's more of a desire, but we want to hear from you, correct, regarding what you're thinking and what you think we should be doing. Any comment?
Like this. Ask the first question, and everybody who agrees will stand up, because you will need to stand up anyway just to get some blood in your...
Okay. So is anybody here looking at standard service models?
Raise your stand up.
Stand up.
Yeah. Come on. We will all stand up in the
Okay. Can you comment any on specific you're looking at?
So far I'd looked at IETF, but I'll look into some more now.
I'm working on some kind of transport networking technologies, and now I'm considering how to use some transport API and open config APIs. Yeah.
Southbound of NSO. Yes, yeah. No, okay.
So the second question is, do you think we Cisco should do something, to help you, and what I had is so my option was, yes, give me something off the shelf that works off the shelf without even me touching the code, compile code, configure the devices automatically. B, just leave me alone, but give me some examples, like GitHub code, etc., what you do in testing, or C, yes, build up some, any other option. So what are your thoughts about that? Now you go.
So I think these kind of services are commoditizing very fast with all the SDN options available in the market. So if there is a future for box-by-box configuration systems, then there should be something like templating towards a very fast implementation. So I think Cisco should deliver for their, especially for their own portfolio, ready solutions.
Regarding the open config, there are lots of versions, and there are lots of devices which use deviation. So I'm very looking forward to use NSO 5.0. Yeah, it has a very great feature. So yeah, I'm looking forward to use it. Yeah, thank you.
It will be tough even then, I'm sure. Okay. Thank you. I think we have to close there. So thank you, Roque, for, I think this was a very nice presentation.